Vamos recomeçar. Então, é com grande prazer que eu gostaria de apresentar para vocês o professor Benoîy Bardy. Ele é professor titular da Universidade de Montpellier, na França. Trabalhou em diversas universidades americanas e francesas. É membro da Sociedade Americana de Cinesiologia e Educação Física e está envolvido com o projeto EuroMove, que é um projeto bastante grande, envolvendo, obviamente, toda a Europa. Ele é responsável pela parte francesa do projeto EuroMove e vai, portanto, agora fazer a sua exposição. So, Professor, please. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for being here. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Yara, Edson, Marcos, Luis, who is Luis, Emerson, the bonnet person, and everyone who made that trip possible. I'm absolutely serious in saying that this initiative that you are starting now is something absolutely unique. I've not seen it in France or in Europe. Starting a deep understanding of the different components of the field, kinesiology, physical activity, physical education, is something very important on an international point of view, and it is very important because the field is kind of diverging in different directions, and what I will try to express today, at least in the first part of my talk, is that people seem to agree about these divergences, is that people seem to be happy. So there seems to be some convergences in the acceptance that the field is diverging. That's the title. And I think we have to be very careful with that, because as already said by some speakers before me, the specificity of the field is something that we need to be very careful about. And I will try in that talk to provide a few examples about what the field should be and how the interdisciplinary effort together from different disciplines, a few directions that we can take. So it's very simple. I will start with part 1, then I will go to 2 and 3. I'm not sure I will go to 4. I may not have the time. I don't want to give a long talk. I would like to speak slowly, and so I think I will skip. I think I will skip the EU aspect. Maybe I will just say a few words. The European situation in kinesiology is very interesting now. I would like to have the time to give at least 1 or 2 examples, but the long section that I prepared, I will not speak too much about. Maybe I can leave that part for the written aspect. I will start very briefly, following other examples, to say a few words about me. As David mentioned, showing your experience, your trajectory in the field is important to understand what you do. And so we very briefly give you like 5 minutes of...
Benoît, I think we are over the time. I'm sorry. We have now to go to the questions.
I knew this would happen. So this is me. So I like physical education. I used to be a physical education teacher, yes. So I got my professional diploma in physical education in 1996. I taught in junior high school and high school for 2 years. And what brought me to physical education and then to kinesiology, movement science if you want, as a scientific discipline, I think like most of you is this passion for physical activity and sport. So I was doing gymnastics, I was doing contemporary dance, and a few other sports. I like sports. My father is an engineer. He wanted me to be an engineer, so I went to physical education. And then, this passion for sports and dance and recreation brought me to physical education. And then really to the desire, this profound desire to understand the basics of movement. How do we move? How is it possible? Just think about that. When you have the intention to move, and then you move, and then you have to control all this very complex body. How do we do that? How do we do that in gymnastics? How do we do that in athletics? How do we do that in dance? But how we do that in very simple movements? The same principle apply. And I really wanted to understand from physiology to biomechanics to motor control how this movement is produced and controlled. And this is how I moved from recreation and dance and sports to trying to understand a little bit of the movement that we're making every day. So I went to Marseille for 6 years as my first professorship, assistant and associate professor. Then I went to Paris for another 6 years. In Paris 11, we like numbers in France, so we have different numbers for different universities. And then I moved to Montpellier in 2005 to start, Emerson mentioned this Euromove project that I'm working on. But I'm also now heavily involved in the European Research Administration as an expert, as an evaluator for project, but also as a member. Brian was mentioning the necessity to be in council and on the other side of the game. I'm contributing to writing the future program in Europe for research. And I'm not sure I'm going to have time to mention that experience, but being on this site and fighting with my buddies, from health, from information technology, from physics and all other disciplines, trying to impose or to tell to these people that movement is very important, is a daily fight. And as you know, Europe is being structured. People are trying now to work together in research and other kind of scholarship. And so I spend quite a bit of time now trying to organize the movement science within the European Commission. Okay, so I would like to, this is not the main part of the talk. I conducted a survey a few years ago, actually Marcos and others helped me on that, trying to just describe the names, the programs, the different institutions, the different fields that capture physical activity, kinesiology, movement science and sport in different countries. And I gave this presentation at the Academy of Kinesiology some years ago. It's very interesting to see the diversity, the variety of names that we use to describe sometimes the same thing, and sometimes things that are very different. And again, the message that I would like you to take here is that it's wide, it's diverse, it's diverging. I will give you a few examples, but people seem to be happy with that. And I think we have to be careful. The variety of situation in terms of the institution, the name, the journals, the society, the type of research that we do is important. And at the same time, Howard was mentioning the necessity of the central dogma, of the specificity of the field, and I think this diverging situation that we live today goes against finding the specificity of kinesiology, physical education and movement, science or sciences. So just a few examples. This is not exhaustive. These are just a few examples of what you can see. So the names, as we already mentioned on many occasions, we use different names to to name the same thing or to name different things. Physical education, physical activities, sports sciences, health, recreation, teaching, and many other terms. As I mentioned already, so kinesiology in Australia or in the US, in North America, doesn't mean the same thing. Kinesiology in Europe doesn't mean the same thing either. So we don't have, for instance, in France, we don't use the word kinesiology. It's being used in Belgium. In Belgium, it's used in Switzerland, but it's used in Belgium and Switzerland to address the kind of professional practice that exists in Australia or sometimes in Canada. So we don't really use the term kinesiology in Europe to name the study of movement the way we name it. So we have in these different names, we have professional activities, we have applied disciplines, we have fundamental knowledge in movement, we have educational and pedagogical components that are involved or not. Different names to name different things and sometimes the same things. Look at institutions and programs. There is no statistics, just a few examples of what you can see in different countries. So in Brazil, it's mostly physical education, and I've seen that sometimes some universities are now calling movement science their program and their departments, but this is not the majority. If you look at different countries, this is the kind of name that we find. Sports sciences, they are very often. Physical education is maybe the most used term to describe the academic program that we are in. Other names, again, you will find sports sciences, physical education, exercise and sports. The health component used to be absent, most absent when I started this survey like 3-4 years ago. And we see now in the program, this is not up to date, you see in the names the term health and health sciences arriving at a very high speed. Now if you look at the French situation, just to give you an idea of what's happening in my own country, we have a very central organization in terms of the way the programs are being built. So we have what we call the CNU, the National University Council. It's a government structure. And this CNU has 47 sections, one section per discipline. So we have like 47 disciplines, at least in France from the institutional point of view. And the Sciences et techniques des activités physiques et sportives, so science and techniques of sports and physical activity, is section number 74. By the way, don't ask me why we have only 57 sections and we have number 74. I cannot answer that question. We have more numbers and don't ask me why, but that's the way it is. So we are section 74. Maybe you have seen that before if you came to France. We have 46 faculties or departments. Let's say 50% faculty of sports sciences or physical education or something else, and 50% departments of other faculties. And the name of these faculties are very different. Who chooses the name of the faculty? People in the faculty. There is no role of the government or the Ministry of Education and Research to impose any name on the faculty. It is up to the faculty people to decide how they want to be called. And so we have Faculty of Sports Sciences. Montpellier, where I come from, is called the Sport and Physical Education. Sometimes you have physical activity and sport. You have, following Brian's presentation yesterday, we have no Faculty of Movement Science so far in the country. There has been attempts. People are thinking about it, the same way Brazil and São Paulo is thinking about this idea. We don't have that in France. The resistance and the tensions that Brian mentioned yesterday in Netherlands and in Trondheim are exactly happening now in France for similar reasons. So we're facing a little bit behind a few years after the same tensions that Brian described yesterday. What is important to notice is that the undergrad, grad, and postgrad programs, the names are fixed. This is the kind of thing that we do. We do adaptive physical activity. We do education and motricity. This is the way it's called in French. We have ergonomics and performance, sport management, training and coaching, and these names are mandatory. We cannot have a program habilitated by the minister if we don't have this name. So any university in France or department in sports sciences will have these names in the program. And then it's been developed in different courses. I will not go into the details, but that these 5 components are mandatory in the program that we have. It is also interesting to note that the PhD programs belong to what we call doctoral schools in the country. And we have only 2 doctoral schools in movement science. One is in the south of France, across 3 or 4 different cities, Montpellier, Marseille, Nice, and others. One is in Paris, and that's the only 2. The other PhD programs are belonging to other schools, like life science or humanities. And you have this funny situation from time to time that a faculty of sports science with ergonomic and performance belong to the civilization doctoral school. We have this kind of situation from time to time. So that's the French situation. Now, as already mentioned, I will be very quick on that. If you look in different places, I have only 4 examples here. Sometimes the academic programs are within the Faculty of Science with no education involved, with no pedagogy involved. It's pure science in the Faculty of Science. There are 2 examples. One was mentioned by, was developed by Brian yesterday in Amsterdam. Another one is in McMaster University in Canada, in Ontario, where the kinesiology department belongs to the Faculty of Science with no education involved and no physical education involved. There are many other examples. These are 2 of them. And on the other side, there are many examples, much more examples, where physical education, I mean the educational aspect and the scientific aspect are in the same programs, in the same departments. Well, I will not be very long on that, but if you look at journals, you have the same situation, the same variety, the same diversity. If you look at how, it's very interesting to look at how journals call themselves. So you will find these terms again. Sometime in an interchangeable way, sometime meaning very different things. And you will find very specific disciplinary journal, and you will find interdisciplinary journal in sport, movement, or physical education. By the way, there are not many journals in movement science. If you look at, largely speaking, largely defined, if you look at the field, you will not find many of them. You will find many journals that are focusing on sports, sports activity, sports medicine. A few journals, not many focusing on physical education. There are not many focusing on movement science per se or kinesiology. This is an example, this is another example. I know, but it's a little bit different in terms of the content, that there are some Brazilian journal with movement in it. We have our own French journal, which is focusing on movement, but this is more the exception than the rules. And to finish that survey, if you look at societies, you're going to find the same thing. So you have a large multidisciplinary societies, you have large, very disciplinary societies, spanning over many disciplines from phys ed to kinesiology to physical activity to sport and related disciplines. By the way, again, there are not many societies, national or international, this is not exhaustive, that have movement science, let's say that have movement as their focus, at least in their names. So lots of them are focusing on sport and lots of movement-related research topics. Others are focusing on exercise. But if you look for kinesiology, you're not going to find many of them. But I found 2 in this survey. One is in Finland, the other one is, you won't be surprised, in Netherlands, that are purely focusing on a movement. Okay, so what are the pros and what are the cons of this large variety of situations at the institutional, at the academic, at the program level that exists in the field? So the pros are numerous. So there are many advantages of covering such a wide field, from the field of movement, physical activity, and David was mentioning about sport, cover a large spectrum of people, of markets, of economy, of money, with interaction from a research point of view with many related fields. So it's a very dense interaction between people, between disciplines, between topics, and altogether, if I can phrase that like this, altogether we count on the international scene, both on a research point of view, on a market point of view, maybe less, we had a discussion with Luis yesterday, on an educational point of view, but it's a big number of people altogether. So large number of society members, fees in societies are something that is important. You need people to pay their fees in societies. Large number of journal readers, contributors, many different sources of funding for the research, for the education, for the different programs. We have this privilege when we look at physical education and movement to cover the spectrum from the science to the education, or what was mentioning a few days ago, the education of doing, the education by doing, and here the science of movement and the education of movement cover all that different facets in the spectrum all together in many places, which is something important from an educational point of view. As already mentioned, it's very attractive. People come to university, as it was my case, I'm sure it's the case for many others, to do sport and physical activity. There is a very large market out of that. And the impact in terms of the societal and economy is becoming more and more important. So that's the pros of having this dense, large variety of topics, names, people, programs, international. But of course there are the cons, and I think these ones are very important. There are many of them. I'm focusing on 4 of them, and I think these 4 disadvantages of the current situation in movement science and physical education, we need to be very careful with that. So one is what was mentioned by Howard Zelasnik 2 days ago, the difficulty that we have to have a central dogma. If we do something different in Purdue and in Montpellier, well, I mean, that may be fine. And this is why I say that the divergences are converging. People are just happy with that situation, that Purdue and Montpellier do different things. But is it good that Purdue, São Paulo, and Montpellier do different things when we are, trying to find what is the specificity of the field? And my argument is that, as made before by Howard and others, it is not necessarily good if we cannot find what is our field, what are the fundamentals of our field, and all the professional and all the educational consequences of that, then, the risk of visibility, the risk of having our central dogma being stolen by someone else, and I will show you that it's already happening, is something that we have to be very careful with. So there is no agreement today, I think. I'm pushing that a little bit far, but I think this is the case about really what the field is doing. Which in turn, produce some difficulty in the visibility that we have. And this was mentioned before. Are you a neuroscientist or are you a kinesiologist? Are you a physical education scientist, or are you a social scientist? I mean, what's the difference? I mean, you're doing social sciences but what's the difference between that and that? So what is our visibility? Seeing from outside, seeing from there, seeing from government, seeing from the funding agencies, seeing from the society. And what is our visibility if we cannot agree on what is the heart of the field? The Shanghai syndrome, is this fascination that people have today to quantify everything. So we are ranking universities based on the first, Shanghai ranking like 10 years ago, and we keep doing that every year. And of course, because my name, the name of my institution, and because the name of my field, kinesiology, is kinesiology there, and health here, and sport here, and physical education here, then kinesiology doesn't exist. Just purely quantitatively by ranking universities, trying to find keywords that specify disciplines. This point, I think, has to be taken seriously. We are not the only discipline to look at movement. We are not the only discipline to look at education. And, if we cannot find an agreement about our field, then the risk that the field will be swallowed by others exists. And I will show you in my field, cognitive sciences and motor control, that is happening. And I'm sure this is happening in many other fields. And of course, we are dispersing the effort, which is not necessarily good. Okay, so I will not try to define more precisely what we do. I will try to give examples. So there's been many definitions provided this week on kinesiology. I've seen the Free University in Amsterdam definition. I've seen some Australian definition referring to something else. Howard did not present that, but he could. If you look at the web page, of the National Academy of Kinesiology in the US, you will find something like this. So this is a study of movement, and movement or physical activity is the intellectual focus, and there are related components on that definition, but literally speaking, kinesiology is the study of movement, and then that's the definition. It is interesting to notice, by the way, that the National Academy of Kinesiology, NAC, used to be called, until very recently, like 2-3 years ago, the American Academy of Kinesiology and Physical Education. So physical education is gone. So why is physical education gone? There are many reasons for that. But the fact that physical education is disappearing from some society names, is something that we have to pay attention to. What is physical education? Well, it's loosely defined. It's loosely defined. It's much loosely defined than kinesiology or movement science, the way I showed you in the previous slide, or what Brian mentioned yesterday. Is this a science with human movement as a subject? Well, in that case, that's kinesiology. And in that case, let's just choose one name and forget about the other one, and choose the one you want. This question actually comes from Yara and Edson paper. It is a science with education as a subject. There are sciences of education. Is physical education a science of education? Is it an art of teaching, inspired, fueled by scientific and non-scientific knowledge? Is it like sport, a social practice? Is it a field of knowledge, looking at the relation between knowledge and practice? I was very surprised when I Googled physical education. I mean, you can try to do that now. Try to Google physical education and look at what is going to be the first hit for that. Well, if you do that, you will find Wikipedia. And you will find this. And you will find this. Physical education is a course taken during primary and secondary education that is based on 5 components: cardiovascular fitness, muscular strength, muscular endurance, flexibility, body composition. Are you happy with that? Well, in that case, you better go to Wikipedia and produce a better definition than this one. But that's exactly an example of what I'm talking about. It's loosely defined. People are not in agreement with what physical education is about. Whether it's kinesiology or not, I think, is still an open question. And, you Google Wikipedia, and this is the first thing that you find. So just, to think about it. I'm mentioning that because if there is this international adventure starting from São Paulo to sort of better clarify, using the help, from philosophy, from ontology, from different disciplines, maybe a speaker tomorrow, clarifying more, this specificity of the different fields, then, this kind of thing I think is important. Okay. Part 2, I would like to give a few examples of what we should do. This is very simple. We say that kinesiology is the study of movement, so we should study movement. And we should study movement. So here is an example. Oh, it doesn't work, this video should work. Well, this video will not work, let me try to show it to you. So we study movement. This is a laboratory situation. This is what I do in my lab. But this is just, an example. So we do the biomechanics. We do the biomechanics of movement. We do the biomechanics of bones. We do the biomechanics of moving bones. Howie was mentioning that 2 days ago. We do the anatomy of the finger. We do the anatomy of the finger during movement. We do the neuroscience. We do the neuroscience of movement. So we have to record brain activity during movement and physical activity. We do physiology. We do the physiology of movement. And it's very simple, it's very pragmatic, but if we do that seriously, then there may be a way to sort of better capture the relation between our disciplines that express what the sciences of movement are. And so the type of experiment that we do in natural sciences, the type of cultural studies that we conduct, the type of signals that we record, the type of mechanisms that we're trying to investigate, are movement related. And I'm still very surprised, I think, if you think about 1 minute at the type of research that we do, and I'm one of them, how much percent of my time do I really try to investigate the basic mechanism underlying movement? I think 50% of my experiments are now dealing with movement. Just because I'm trying, and it was mentioned before, and I'm in the same area, I'm trying to dig one of these little mechanisms here in neuroscience, in physiology, in biology, in psychology, and then I try to forget, the integrated level of movement. So, if we take that idea seriously, I have my own circuits and my own interaction. Well, I'm sorry, this is very simple, but I want to keep simple today. If, the science of movement is the science of moving animals, or movements, or human movement science is the science of moving humans, then, we need to consider the movement. And these are just a few examples of the relation, of moving animals and different disciplines. What I would like to address here is that, first of all, something very common is this complex relation, this sort of love-hate relation between kinesiology, defined, roughly speaking, at the interaction, at the integrated level of these disciplines, and the mother disciplines. Well, of course, as mentioned by David and others, the biodynamics aspect and the natural sciences try to phagocyte and to overcome the social aspect. This is true, I think, everywhere. But what I would like to concentrate on here is that am I a neuroscientist when I do the neuroscience of running, or am I a kinesiologist? Well, I don't have any answer to this question, but there is something that I'm absolutely certain about, this is a conviction, is that the difference that we have with this fundamental discipline are here. Is that we are an integrated field, an integration science, and we are an integration science because movement is the emerging property of the interaction of many components. So I think that's an important aspect that we need to care about. If I take my field, if I take neuroscience, for instance, if I look at the relation between the genesis of the movement, the intention to move, and the reproduction of the movement, there is not a one-to-one relation. There is not a unique relation between the intention, the motor command, the force that I can record, the muscular contraction, and the outcome, which is the movement per se. There is not a direct, there is not a unique, and there is not a univocal relation between these different levels. And you know why? This is because movement is an emergent property. Movement results from the interaction of many components. If my muscle have a certain level of fatigue, then the relation between my motor command and my movement will change, as physiologists know. So because there is this complexity, and this is true for all, I think, disciplines. I cannot only speak about mine, but I think this is true for all disciplines. So because there is not a unique relation between the micro level in one discipline and the macro level in kinesiology, due to the influence of the other discipline, then we need to look at the other discipline. And I argue here, I know it's a little bit strong to do that, but I do argue that our specificity is not only to look at movements, but it's also to look at the integration in and across disciplines. I cannot understand the regulation of complex movements, which is my field of research, if I don't try to understand, the basics in physiology. I cannot understand, how we produce movements if I don't, back to the discussion we had with Andrew yesterday, if I don't understand the role played by culture and the social and political and economical context onto the movement. Because the movement is not free of the economical, political, or psychological context. So my conjecture is that kinesiology is an integrated discipline in and across what can be called the mother disciplines that are illustrated for a few examples here. And I would like to give you two examples of that. One is this one. I'm sure you've seen that before. So what do you see here? So those who have never seen that, what do you see? You see a walker, a person walking. How do you know that? How do you know that?
They took my class.
What?
They took my class.
Oh, they took your class. Excellent, excellent. So for those who didn't take Marco's class, you see somebody moving. So now, let me do something pretty weird. What do you see here? You see not only a person walking, but you see a man walking. You see a boy walking. You want to see a female walking? Who's a female walking? Very familiar. Do you want to see a male, heavy, Nervous? Walking? You see Emerson? Do you want to see a... Do you want to see... Do you want to see a happy, relaxed, female walking? So there are come on. So there are movement signatures of happiness, right? So there are movement signatures of motivation. So there are movement signatures of culture. So there are movement signatures of whatever properties you can think of that are not belonging to biodynamics, but that do belong to, cultural component, social component, maybe economical components. When you see a banker walking after 2008, he's walking like this. This is just a very well-known and easy example. Actually, this model is wrong. This is not exactly the way we walk. It's just a simulation. But it gives you an idea of what I'm trying to say, which is that, and we started some discussion with David yesterday on that aspect, there are ways to bring together different disciplines in new terminology from biodynamics to social sciences or cultural studies. There are ways to find convergences. There are ways to work together and identify the principle underlying this kind of thing. This is just an example among many others, and I think that's an example of what kinesiology is or kinesiology should be about. Not digging into these different mother disciplines, trying to find the integration at a macro level between these different disciplines. Okay, one last thing on that aspect is that an absolutely key necessity in order for kinesiology, movement science, phys ed, whatever you want to call it, to survive is that it has to produce the knowledge. Movement science is not an applied field. Sport sciences can be an applied field, but it can be a fundamental field of research. And we have to find ways to produce the fundamental knowledge as any discipline. And I argue that there has been many examples over the last 20 years of success for kinesiology to produce fundamental research. I don't have any time to go into the details, but if you take sport sciences, some sensory motor skills that you can find in sports, you're going to understand what I'm trying to say. If you look at this kind of sports and many others, we don't have any theory today explaining this behavior. We don't know how it works. People explain how we, myself and many others, we have spent the last 20 years or more, trying to understand, this, trying to understand this, reducing the complexity, reducing the number of degrees of freedom in order to better understand what the system is doing. We're dealing with, you know how many degrees of freedom we have here? I mean, billions. 700 muscles, something like that, 100 segments, joints, somebody who is running at 10 meters per second, who is able to regulate his stride length and frequency in order to put one foot on a 10 centimeter line, we don't know how it works. If there is somebody in that room who says that, no, I would like to talk to him. No. We're dealing with complexity, and complexity is a difficult matter. We don't have any theory from the information processing view, from the dynamical system theory, from the ecological approach. We don't have any theory today in my field able to explain this type of behavior. We're moving forward, we're progressing, we don't have one. Same here, same here, same here. Let me give give you one example of that. This is supposed to move. This is a backward somersault. You will not move, so I will demonstrate you. No, I will not. Just an example. This is the only data I will present you. These young athletes, these young gymnasts, 12 years old, this is national team in France, they do that 100 times. There are some gymnasts in this room, you know what I'm talking about. You can do a backward somersault 1, 2, 3 times, 4, I mean, an infinite number of times. It's going to be very stable, as how we mentioned a few days ago. It's at the same time going to be very adaptable. Indicators of expertise, stability, and adaptability. It takes about 500 milliseconds to do a backward standing somersault, 500 milliseconds. The head turns at about 1,000 degrees per second, and they do that, you know, like, not like me. We found something pretty unique here. Some research I did 10 years ago. This is absolutely not automatic. This is absolutely not programmed. This is not open loop. This is not fit for work. This is completely and totally regulated at different moments in space and time in this very short period of time. So what these baby gymnasts are able to do at the age of 12 is basically to perceive where they are in time with respect to the ground and control the rotation of their body, tucking, extending, maintaining for a longer period of time, opening more rapidly, accelerating, decelerating the rotation, you know, the angular momentum. This is your course in biomechanics, first year. The angular momentum is constant, so you can regulate the moment of inertia by, you know, you can modulate the velocity by reducing or increasing the inertial momentum, and this is what they do. So basically, they constantly regulate the opening or the closing of the body based on the time remaining before contact in a few milliseconds. I mean, like 200 milliseconds. We have no theory today which can explain this kind of behavior. What I'm saying here is that don't look at this one yet. I don't know how to go backward. This cannot go backward with this. Sport science is not necessarily an applied field in which we are exploiting the concept and the theory developed somewhere else and applied to sport activities. This is the other way around. We use the complexity that is inherent of physical activity and sport to produce new theory, new concepts, and potentially new methodology. And I can quote you many, many examples of that. Look at the big names in kinesiology. Dick Schmidt, Howard Zelaznik, Michael Turvey, Scott Kelso, and many others. You know, they are not coming from neuroscience. They are not coming from molecular biology. They are not coming from other disciplines. They have developed the theory for the field, producing the fundamental knowledge in kinesiology. So my argument is that we should not consider only physical activity, phys ed, and sport as being an applied ground, applying theory developed somewhere else. This is a place to develop the theories, the concepts, and the methods. Okay, I will finish with that part. I will not go into the Europe aspect. The study of movement is attractive in many ways, and we have to be careful not to have our field stolen by others. And as I mentioned already a little bit, I will give you a few details. This is happening from time to time because, you know, maybe for the byproduct of it, health, maybe for the knowledge that we can gain by looking at movement. Many disciplines are interested by, you know, what we're doing. And if you look at the relation between movement and perception, you have a wonderful example of that. We are moving, if you have followed that field a little bit, we are moving since the end of the 20th century from a Cartesian dualism, computationalism view of the relation between movement and perception to an embodied and enacted view of the relation between perception and action, where these two concepts, perceiving and moving, are much more intertwined, are much more linked than we thought before. Movement is perception. There is no, perception without moving. This is a good example. Movement is perception. There is no perception without movement. Who claims that? Well, today there are many people claiming that. And you may recognize some of these names here. Obviously Gibson, the father of the ecological approach to perception and action, prominently proposed this mutual relation between perceiving and acting. But if you look at more contemporary aspects, this is exactly what's happening today in different disciplines. So Jérôme Brunner, Francesco Varela proposed the concept of enaction. Maybe you have heard this concept before. Enaction is getting knowledge about the world by moving, by doing in that world. And it's a close concept. There are some similarities and differences between Varela and Gibson. There are papers, many papers on that similarities and differences. This influential paper by David O'Regan and Alva Noe, already mentioned, is a kind of initiative to operationalize the enaction concept into the sensory motor areas, the sensory motor contingencies. You know this wonderful work by Profit and many others on embodied perception, the fact that you perceive the world based on the properties of your body. Dennis Profit, who conducted this wonderful experiment of the perception of slant, for instance, would depend on the weight you have in your backpack. So if you have a very heavy backpack, you perceive the slant as being different than when you don't have much weight on your backpack. Embodied cognition, of course, the same principle. Your cognitive activities depends on your own action. All this wonderful neurophysiology comparing seeing and doing, the mirror neuron literature, where you have the same type of neuron that are firing when you're seeing someone doing an action or when you're doing an action. Various motor theories of perception, and particularly thinking about speech theories of perception, promoted by Lieberman, in which you perceive the meaning of a sentence not only by the sound, but also by looking at the vocal tract and the structure in the movement produced by the speaker. The robotics by Brooks, Pfeiffer, and many others are today exploiting this concept in order to produce self-organized robots with minimal commands and algorithms. While there are a bunch of different theories addressing this point here, none of them were developed in kinesiology. None of them were developed in kinesiology. So this very fundamental mutuality between perceiving and acting, which characterize, movement, has not been developed in kinesiology. So people are looking at movement because it's a wonderful concept, it's a wonderful research paradigm, and these theories, I argue, should be, or should have been, or maybe will be, developed in kinesiology. This is what I mean when I say that we have to be careful with defining the specificity of field, not to have it stolen by someone else, to be direct. And I think I will stop here. I wanted to show a few slides on how kinesiology is going in Europe, but I think it's too late for today. Thank you very much.
nós temos um tempo reservado para as perguntas.
I will just leave you with this.
Yeah, this I think this returns to what we were talking yesterday concerning. Well, you mentioned the cross-disciplinary approach also, and but what I want to ask you is that isn't this confusion, let's say, among all these names, because we don't actually define, or we don't have a philosophical basis for each one of these names. So what it seems to me is that regardless of the name, like you were talking about the same thing, but as you said, it's related to a more merchandising approach, because this will lead to more brand, for example. So maybe what we have here in Brazil, for example, we have some research and some influence, for example, from a Portuguese professor, Manuel Sérgio, that has this proposal of motricity, which I don't know if the translation is correct, motricidade, which has a philosophical approach that differs from movement by itself. What we have here, for example, when you say movement or science of movement, human movement, it's the movement that it's observed. It's possible to be observed. Where, for example, if you go to this theory of motricity, the intention of movement, this is what you're saying, is important. What type of, it doesn't mean, it's more important the intention than the movement that's observed. So, I think this is some of the confusion we have here in Brazil, for example, and I think you put it, shed light on it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We do in Europe sometimes make this distinction. We do that in France too, and actually the French journal is called Science and Motricity, Science and Motricité, for the same reason. The Facultad de Motricidad Humana in Lisbon is an example. So people are making this distinction between movement and motricity. Movement being more the observable point, the emergence of the fundamental mechanism, and motricity being closer to the process, closer to from the intention to the muscular contraction. I think it's. I don't know what to answer. I think I'm not qualified to address whether this distinction is important or not for the field. I think it has to be clarified. Whether we're dealing with the sciences of motricity or the sciences of movement. Personally, I think that motricity is not the only component in producing the movement, and that the interaction with the other elements are important. Now, whether we need a science for motricity or a science for movement, I leave that to the philosophers and to David. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's why we're making the distinction sometimes to time in Europe, more than in North America, I think. I don't know how you say it, but sometimes it shows up in the discussion there.
Maybe this would be a pro to have different approaches, not a con. Okay, because if you have different approaches, you have like a variety of philosophical approaches that backs each one of the proposals. Or else you would have only one, and then this would be hegemonic. I mean, in my opinion, that it's richer to have different approaches, and we can agree with that.
Well, I mean, I sure agree. It is much richer. We have different focus, we have different terminology, we have different approaches, we have different professional fields. I agree with everything you say. The only take-home message is that if we are, in addition to agreeing, we have to be careful with what the specificity of the field is, or the fields are, what the different specificities are. So this definitional analysis is very important. And what is the hurt? What is the fundamental knowledge? In our field, I and others have the feeling that sometimes, often, we are not paying enough attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think just to follow on from what you said, German and Dutch.
Motoric, yes. Partial movement.
Yeah, there's no divide between movement and posture.
Yeah.
We're talking about movement.
Yeah.
Really, there is no movement without posture.
Yeah.
It's integral. How do you simply reaching create inertial forces that are pushing you back? But I want to stop that movement. That's what our posture is. Never get that posture.
Can I comment on that? I love this term for that specific reason, and we have many discussions with Marcos on that aspect. What is really different between posture and movement? So we have theories of posture, theories of postural control, and we have theories of movement. It doesn't go anywhere. We had discussion about quiet stance. Quiet stand does not exist. Posture is movement. The stable organization of my segments, requires movement. Requires movement of my, muscles, movement of my neurons, movement of my respiration, movement of everything. So I like very much the German approach and Dutch approach for that reason, and opening up new direction for research. And I think we're stuck. This is what we call in the way we are developing theories of posture and movements for that particular reason. Posture and gait, a journal, theories of posture and theories of movement. This is much more integrated than we think. Yeah, it's funny not to have this term outside Germany and Netherlands. Do you use that sometimes? Motoric?
Motoric or yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we can open questions for both now. Or it's time to stop right now. When we're going to stop thinking. Vamos parar por aqui? Yeah, I think. Well, if anybody has a question, any other question to Dave, we can do, or
Yeah, maybe.
it's open.
I would like to ask him a question,
Sure.
if it's possible. Hi. You mentioned that some of you guys in Australia use health in order to get more grants, for example. But that doesn't create confusion among other areas such as physiotherapy or nutrition and stuff that also may use the term health. How is that happening in the field there?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was more to try and send a message that we also look at health with our research, because I think, rightly or wrongly, sort of the idea we started with physical education. So I think there's kind of idea that sports science, exercise science people, run around the field and kick a football, and that's, we don't do real science. So I think that was part of the shift to get to human movement science, sport and exercise science. And it's probably, to be honest, it's kind of an insecurity. No one else does it. You don't do medical science or engineering science. But with us, we have to say, we do science sort of thing. So I think it's interesting whether it's because it's a young profession. So I think that's the science is, there's a big spotlight on that. And then to get close to your question, I guess there was a concern that if you're in a human movement science faculty and you'd apply for money from a health agency, they'd go, what are you doing here? Why aren't you applying for money somewhere else? So I don't know what difference it makes, because I guess at the end of the day people will judge your research and the research projects, but at least at my old university it was seen important to put up front that part of what we do is to look at health. So exercise and health and science. So exercise and health science, just to make it very clear that we're involved in those fields.
So Benoît, can you do some kind of prediction where we're going to be in this field in 10 years, 20 years? It's going to be the same mess? Or, I mean, we're going to be here in 20 years?
I think I'm going to be in São Paulo. Yeah, that's a good question. What can be the prediction?
Be careful. Whatever prediction you make, it has to be wrong, you realize.
Well, I can make many.
Don't make a prediction for your lifetime, okay? Do that for 50 years from now.
Well, let's go to the science fiction scenario in 50 years. Well, there are many. Let's talk about science and the science and technology. I think the information technology is going to change radically the field of kinesiology. It's happening already because it provides new toys and tools to address questions that we are absolutely unable to address today. We're starting to have artificial muscles made with polymers, that are able to produce contraction for the entire body. We're trying to have nanotechnology being able to measure the activity of the microfiber of the muscle during a marathon. We're starting to have tensor diffusion fMRI, who is able to measure, and fast EEG plus NIRS technology that we can use already now for addressing the changes in cortical activities between two tracks. We do one, we do two, and in between you can record the changes. So all these technology are starting to be available, and they are radically changing the way we look at our problem. I think that's one direction. Technology is going to be helpful to address your types of questions. I'm talking about the questions. Do we know today how intention to move produce movements? We have no idea. I mean, we have theories and models. We know part of the shape. We don't have a global picture. I think in 50 years we'll have a global picture or close to the global picture for some aspects. And information technology, nanotechnology, virtual reality, diffusion tensor fMRI, and many other toys will be helpful for that. Are you satisfied with that, or do you want another one? Now, in terms of a more important aspect is, and I have no answer. I'm very concerned by this relation between kinesiology and the other disciplines, because, well, this is my personal experience. I am an ecological psychologist. I did my PhD on optical flow and locomotion a long time ago, trying to push this relation between movement and perception as far as I could. I couldn't have my papers published. One, because they were bad papers, and two, because the establishment would not accept them. And we have all experienced that situation in different circumstances. That's not an excuse, but that's the way it was at the time. When I look at the 10 theories that I presented, they all do the same thing. And the fact that we have not been able or not be able enough to sort of protect our concepts concerns me. So whether kinesiology will be diffused in many other disciplines, or whether we're going to be attractive for the other disciplines, you know, it's these tensions between the disciplines, it's a dynamic thing. The tensions are going to move in the future. In what direction? I don't know.
Well, this was the question I asked again. The last one. We don't know.
Edson has a question.
Well, as the seminar goes on, it is impossible not to think in no talks. So, but after listening to Benoît, I began to think whether we started from the wrong point, or whether I am starting from the wrong point. In the first meeting we had on Monday, I said that, and I said that we are as well before that I wish that with these meetings, with these seminars, we were able to define better what we were. We were able to reach a point where every approach, every area, every subfield would be acknowledged, recognized as important. But after all these talks, after Benoît talks, I'm beginning to think whether this is important. Why is it so important to define what we do as long as we do it well? And with a vision that might help people to understand, which might help people to move better. It doesn't matter which area we are, as long as we do it well. Benoît gave a lot of examples from people from different areas. They would not call themselves kinesiologists, but they had a vision. Brunner was a kinesiologist, or Varela, but they had a vision. And I think that is, Brian said something very interesting yesterday about what is moving. He gave two examples from two cultures, the Irish culture and the from Norway. So as long as we know that, and that's why perhaps how we said about the core, what is our central dogma, it doesn't matter what we are, as long as we do it well. And do it well, I think, does not mean publish in highly impactful journals. But it means that also. But that is a consequence. So I don't know nothing as the meeting goes on, but we have tomorrow, perhaps.
Any other question? No?
I have.
Yeah.
Movement is different of the human in movement, isn't it?
That's the point, yes.
Can you repeat the
No,
question?
Have my time.
No, just repeat the question, or then I can repeat your question. Because nobody heard.
No, please.
So Yara is asking whether movement and human in movements are similar or different, and whether they are, relating to the same discipline. Yeah, I think you're right. We are addressing animals in movement, humans and non-human animals in movements. We are mostly concerned by humans in movements, but we have animal research too. I'm sure David and others are doing animals in movement because they reveal interesting properties to understand human movement. But yes, this is humans in movement. It reminds me, so Human in Movement is the title from one of the books by Mugridge, right? It is the title of a book by Muybridge, Human Movement. No Muybridge, this famous American photographer. British, excuse me.
Yeah.
British. Migrated to California for the horse competition. Well, let me finish by, actually this is a very interesting example. I'm sorry to shorten this answer, but the relation between Muybridge and another famous guy, happening to be French, Etienne Jules Marais, you heard of that name, Etienne Jules Marais? The relation between Muybridge and Marais is very interesting. Marais is a scientist. He was professor of physiology of perception and action at the Collège de France. Muybridge, British, came from England to California to measure whether horses would touch the ground during galloping. You remember this very famous cover in Science in 1838? Maybe you don't remember, we don't remember that also. And this story between Marais and Muybridge has to be, this is for the record, has to be written. It has not been written yet. And it is a very important story. They have discovered the same principle underlying movement at the same time. Well, Marais was a little bit first. At the same time, they have met once, they have exchanged a little bit, they hated each other. They have the same initials, EJM, Etienne Jules Marais, Edward J. Muybridge. They were born the same year, they died the same year, and the story between these two giants of science and photography has to be written.
Just as an aside, I don't know when it was uncovered, but Muybridge, most of his films were not scientific at all.
Oh yeah, he was an artist. Yeah.
And so today we would classify a lot of those as being pornographic, as a matter of fact.
Excuse me, the title of his book is Human Figures in Motion.
If there is no other question, we are going to finish. So I would like to thank you, Benoît. I also would like to thank David for his presentation. I would like to thank you. And I'd like to thank you, everybody who came here during these 3 days. And remember that tomorrow we have another session starting at 11, okay, a.m. And then at 3 p.m., okay? Thank you very much.